Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of...
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this episode we're welcoming in cryptozoologist Richard Freeman. He's coming to us from the UK. He's an author of several books, but his most recent one is called The Highest Strangeness. And we got the show together pretty quickly, but I'm really thankful to Mr. Freeman for being able to do it and to agreeing to do it. And we're coming to you December 15th, just in case there's a timestamp that matters, although most of these shows are evergreen. So, Richard Freeman, thank you. Welcome to the Garden.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. So, I'm not sure that everyone knows that a cryptozoologist is an actual real trade. They think about Bigfoot and Loch Ness and things like that, and there's debates raging on whether those things are real or not. But cryptozoology is a long discipline of seeking out animals that have not yet been identified or have not yet been found. And, there's been a lot just this year that have been either rediscovered that were thought to be extinct, or new species found. I saw the one that I think they called the Darkness that looks like it's sort of like a predator shrimp in the deep, deep dark. And also in the past, one of my memories on Facebook showed me an article about some Japanese whale they found that was neither mammal nor fish from some time in the past. So maybe you could tell people about what a cryptozoologist is and how you, your origin story from, how do you become a lad? I mean, everyone wants to chase monsters, but how do you actually make it happen?
Well, cryptozoology, it comes from the Latin cryptos, meaning hidden, and zoology pertaining to animals. So it's the science of hidden animals, and it covers things that are in several different categories, including animals that are unknown to science, although native people might know about them, and many people might have seen them. We don't have what is called a type specimen or a voucher specimen for them. And within that category, you have things like sea serpents, the Mongolian Death Worm, the yeti, the Orangatan, stuff like that. Another category is animals that are classed as extinct, but are almost certainly still around, like the Tasmanian Wolf, the pink-headed duck, things like that. Great ivory-billed woodpecker is another one. And recently we've had the rediscovery of the owl parrot, which was thought to be, the night parrot in Australia, which was thought to be extinct. And then the final category is animals that have grown very much bigger than the textbooks say they should do. Human beings like to put things into categories and put limits on things. It's the way our mind works. And often you'll see these maximum sizes for animals quoted in books that in reality are probably nothing like as big as they actually get. So you could include things like giant crocodiles, giant anacondas, giant pythons within that. So cryptozoology doesn't always have to be about big scary monsters. It's about unknown animals. There's much more to it than Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster.
And what's your origin story? So, like, where do you come from? How do you study to become a cryptozoologist? How do you fall into it? Or how more to the point, how did you fall into it?
Well, I generally answer that in question with 3 words: classic Doctor Who. When I was growing up in the 1970s, I was a massive fan of the science fiction series Doctor Who, which back in the 70s was as much about horror as it was about science fiction. And it is nothing like the sort of woke box-ticking garbage that the BBC is spewing out today. It was genuinely frightening and thought-provoking, and it predicted fracking 40-odd years before it was actually a thing. And a lot of the stories that were set on Earth were very compelling because of their immediateness and very Lovecraftian in many ways. So you had stories about giant glowing green maggots the size of salamis crawling out of slag heaps in Wales, and intelligent humanoid dinosaurs waking up from millions of years of slumber and hibernation to find this upstart mammal has taken over their planet. It was really dark and thought-provoking stuff and incredibly exciting, and that's what fired my interest in strange creatures. That and the works of David Attenborough. Programs like Fabulous Animals, which has just turned up again on YouTube. First time I'd seen it since I was 5.
Wow.
It's never been transmitted again. Things like The World About Us and Life on Earth, stuff like that. I'm always fascinated in natural history. And when I left school, I became a zookeeper. I was a zookeeper for a number of years, and I worked with a little bit of everything when I was training, and then I specialised in reptiles. Reptiles has always been a big passion of mine, particularly crocodilians. And from then on, my interest in strange animals just grew and grew. And one day, I was on holiday in the southwest of England, in Cornwall, and there was a museum, sadly now defunct, called Potter's Museum of Curiosity, which was created by this Victorian taxidermist who made all sorts of weird dioramas of stuffed animals and collected all sorts of strange objects and put them all together in this museum. Sadly, it's now been broken up. But I visited this museum. I picked up a little magazine called Animals and Men, which was about cryptozoology, and it was very good. So I subscribed to it, and it was published by this outfit called the Centre for Zoology. So I started writing for it. At the time I was living in Yorkshire, in the northeast of England. I became the Yorkshire representative. I went and met John Downs, who was the man behind the magazine and behind the Centre for Zoology, and he said, "Come on down and work with me and be our zoological director." So I moved down to Devon, joined the Centre for Zoology, became a zoological director, and since then I've been all around the world on the track of animals like the giant anaconda, the Tasmanian wolf, the yeti, the Mongolian death worm, the orangutan, and many, many more. I've had all sorts of adventures in different places around the world.
I don't even know where to start, but I guess I'm going to start simple. I mean, I should probably start with the Mongolian death worm, but I'm not going to. I'm going to resist that temptation. What is the difference in? I mean, I imagine there's a technical definition between the difference between a anaconda and a giant anaconda, and a crocodile or crocodilian and a giant crocodilian. Like, when does something go from being it's just big to it's actually classified as giant?
That's a very good question. A lot of the textbooks say that the crocodiles max out at 23 feet. They don't. They get much bigger. The biggest one ever measured was 28 feet 4 inches. That was measured by a recognised expert.
And that's snout to tail?
Yeah, tip of the snout to the tip of the tail. So anything that size up would be considered a giant crocodile. And you get stories of them of upwards of 33 feet, which at that size they're going to be weighing 4 tons. It's the length of a bus and the width of a car. It's the same with this giant anaconda. 27, 28 feet is the scientifically accepted maximum, but there are very persistent reports of much, much bigger ones in the jungles of South America, and they spend most of their time in the water, buoyed up by the water. That the anacondas don't lay eggs. The female gives birth to live young in the water, so they hardly ever come out onto land, the really big ones. So they can get the colossal sizes simply by being buoyed up by the water. They don't have to worry about crawling around on land.
Are there other snakes that have live birth?
Yeah, quite a few.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, all the viper family, so that's vipers and bushmasters and rattlesnakes, they give birth to live young.
I mean, I know one of the hallmarks of being a mammal, with the exception of the platypus and the echidna, is live birth. I wasn't aware that there were other creatures that did live birth as well. I thought they were all eggs.
Yeah, lizards do it as well. What they do is retain the eggs in the body, and the eggs hatch within the female's body, then she gives birth to live young.
Yeah, but I mean, technically, it's probably what happens with humans as well. I don't know. We're getting out of my depth here. How many kinds of? Okay, so in the world of crocodilians, I know we know that there's alligators. We know that there's crocodiles. There's something called caimans. There's something called grand caimans. Which are the biggest and which are the baddest?
The two giants of the group are the saltwater crocodile, or Indo-Pacific crocodile, which comes from northern Australia and tropical Asia. And the biggest one, reliably measured, as I mentioned before, is 28 feet 4 inches. Then there's the Nile crocodile of sub-Saharan Africa, which is, if anything, more aggressive even than the saltwater crocodile. And the biggest one of those measured was one shot by a German zoologist in 1903 in Tanzania, and he measured it at 25 feet, but it had 3 feet of its tail missing. It was probably bitten off by another crocodile when it was much smaller. So that would have been about 28 feet if it had had the end of its tail on. And even an average size saltwater crocodile or Nile crocodile, they'll take down lions, tigers, water buffaloes, sharks, giraffes, and they're both man-eaters as well. They will include humans on there.
And their jaws are incredibly strong, aren't they?
The most powerful bite of any animal in the world. A big crocodile has a bite 3 times more powerful than a great white shark.
Really? Is it more powerful than a hippopotamus?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's pretty impressive. I'm a little fascinated with the old river horse, mostly in renaming it, because I think that's a terrible name for it. But I imagine that the Egyptian or the Nile crocodiles are probably more ornery because there's more competition with other predators than saltwater crocs that are in Southeast Asia and Australia. Or is that just because I grew up on Tarzan?
They're both very, very dangerous. But the Nile crocodile has a slightly larger human death toll attributed to it. And with both of them, they evolved with large mammals. So they're geared up by evolution to attack, kill, and eat large mammals. And a human being is a large mammal. With something like, so the American alligator, it includes much fewer large mammals in its diet because it hasn't got so many large animals living alongside it. The same with the caimans in South America. They don't have so many large mammals with them, so they're significantly less inclined to attack human beings.
Right.
Although it does help.
Right, right. If you go into the wrong place, but they have plenty of other choices that are easier and smaller, and maybe just swimming right up to them. Before we get into like the fun animals, this might be fun in and of itself, but obviously you're familiar with this concept, and I imagine most of the audience is as well. But just in case there's not, there's this theory that on islands there's sort of species shrink. So you get the pygmy hippopotamus, you had pygmy elephants, you have smaller cats, smaller dogs, smaller predators on islands because, well, there's less food. If you're a giant on an island like King Kong, you're going to need a lot more territory. Have you found anything that sort of defies that, other than like an escaped animal from a zoo or something, where there's an animal that's bigger than it should be living on an island, according to standard thought?
It actually goes both ways. There's island dwarfism. That's when you get things like stegodont elephants that used to be on islands in the Mediterranean and Indonesia that were very small. The smallest of them was only about 3 feet high, 4 feet high. And you've got pygmy hominins like Homo floresiensis on Flores. And today you get small animals on islands. It tends to be that big animals become small, but also small animals become big. So you get the giant tortoises of the Galapagos and the Aldebaran Islands that started off, their ancestors were very small, but because there was no competition on the islands, they got very big. And the dodo, the famous dodo of Mauritius, that was a type of pigeon. It was a member of the pigeon family. I think the tooth-billed pigeon is its closest living relative, but their ancestors were the size of ordinary pigeons. But because there were no predators on Mauritius, they became flightless over thousands and thousands and thousands of years and got bigger and bigger. And then humans came along and started hunting them. And they had no fear because there were no predators to fear. So humans could catch them easily. And they released things like dogs which hunted them and cats and rats which took the eggs. And that was the end of the dodo because human beings changed the evolutionary goalposts.
Right. It's not because they were dumb. It's because they had no reason to be afraid of anything. I mean, nobody calls the polar bear dumb. Everyone knows that the polar bears don't have much contact with humans, and they're not afraid of them. So that's why they're apparently the bear you want to encounter the least in the wild. Probably also because you're bogged down by 100 pounds of insulating materials to just survive. But so. You had mentioned some of the real, and you laid out a list. I mean, but obviously this is Guardian Dunes. My audience is going to hear about the Yeti. So let's start with the Yeti and its other cousins: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeren, Yowie, whatever name the sort of these not ape, not man, something in between goes by.
Well, there seems to be several of them, several different species around the world. And the thing about the Asian Yeti, you need to get into your head first, is that it's not white. If you look at a picture of the Yeti online, you get loads and loads of pictures of white creatures. They're not white.
Right.
It comes from a mistranslation of the Sino-Tibetan name, Nitokangne, which means abominable man of the rocks, and it was mistranslated as abominable man of the snows. So we've got this false notion of this white furred creature wandering around above the snow line where there's no food anyway.
Right.
Most of the sightings come from the forests, which are very high in food. Now, the term Yeti, it's Nepalese, means rock beast. And the stories of them go back to pre-Buddhist times, stories of this huge hairy creature that lived in the mountains and used rocks as weapons, which is probably where the name comes from, because they're supposed to hurl big heavy rocks at yaks to kill them by smashing their skull and eat the flesh of the yaks. They're omnivorous. They eat both meat and plants. In the Himalayas and Tibet, there seem to be 3 different kinds. There's a very big one, which is 10 feet plus tall, with dark hair, black or very dark brown. There's a more man-sized one with gingery brown hair, which will sometimes lope along on all fours. Most of them walk upright most of the time, but this man-sized one will occasionally go down on all fours. And then there's a smaller one with sandy blonde hair, sandy brown hair, which lives lower down, which is about 3 to 4 feet tall. And they seem to be distinct species. They're not the young of one of the biggest species, but they're never seen together. But there are at least 3. And then in Russia you have the almasty, which is significantly more human-like. It's about 6 to 7 feet tall, has a thick brow ridge, flattened nose, covered in hair, but it looks more human than the yeti. Once again, it has primitive tool use. It doesn't seem to have fire, but it will use clubs and rocks as weapons. It was taken so seriously in the Soviet period that they even had a government-backed commission several years to look for it, and it was called the Snowman Commission, and the commission has been reopened recently to look for it, and I've been on the track of several of these. Then on the island of Sumatra, in Indonesia, you have the Orangatan, and that's probably the cryptid I'm most linked with, because I've been over there 6 times looking for it now. I've found its footprints, I've found its fur, I've found its handprints, I've heard it calling. One of my colleagues saw it, and that appears to be a ground-dwelling relative of the orangutan, so it's an upright walking ape. The hair we got from the jungles of Sumatra, which was found next to some footprints, was analysed by a guy called Lars Thomas from Copenhagen, who works at Copenhagen University. He's an expert in mammal hair, and he looked at it. They couldn't get the DNA from it; it was too corrupted. But looking at the scale arrangement of the hair, he said, whatever this thing is, it's related to the Sumatran orangutan, but it's not the Sumatran orangutan. And he quotes my quoting directly, and he says, I'm forced to accept that there's a large unknown species of primate in Sumatra.
So, but it sounds like you're saying that it's a relative or maybe a new species of orangutan that we have not yet discovered, which may or may not be similar to the Yeti situation, though it sounds like that's different. Now, you said you've tracked them. Have you found footprints or physical evidence or hair that can't be matched to anything else for these?
With the orangutan death, yes, I've found footprints, hair, handprints. I've heard it calling. It has a very distinct call, which is quite unlike anything else. Do you remember a camp and rather preachy kids cartoon from the 80s called Freeman and the Masters of the Universe?
Of course, by the power of Grayskull.
Yeah. Well, do you remember Skeletor, the villain? He had this weird high-pitched laugh.
Yes.
The orangutan call sounds weirdly like that. When you hear that in the jungle, it's very surreal.
I bet.
Very surreal.
Is he blaming Evil Lynn on his plan failing?
I always had a thing for Evil Lynn. I thought she was quite hot.
She was. I mean, especially compared to the other company he kept. But I mean, Beastman seems a little bit like could be one of your suspects.
Mm-hmm. And with the Yeti, I've seen the tracks of the Yeti, which is a much, much bigger animal. But I've seen these human-like tracks in the jungles of northern India. And they were going along a jungle stream, and whatever it was stopping, and it was moving boulders that no human being could move, to get at freshwater crabs and eat the crabs, and we tracked it through the jungle. And the people we talked to there, they all describe it as looking very like a gorilla, but standing on its hind legs and with long dark hair. We met a guy who saw one making a big nest on the jungle floor. We talked to a guy who saw a female suckling a young. We talked to the chief of one of the hill tribes in the city. He had seen it, and also the village shaman had seen it as well when he was out collecting herbs and stuff in the jungle. And I said it makes a sort of threat behaviour by shaking the bushes and roaring, which they found very frightening.
I would think. Does it? What do you think it is? Do you think it's like a pocket of Neanderthals that have survived, or Denisovans, which we don't exactly know what they are? Do you think it's entirely different hominin that even though it still exists, hasn't left behind archaeological evidence or anthropological evidence, tissue remain. Maybe they bury their dead or whatever the case might be. Or do you think it's something else? I mean, I don't go into the woo-woo stuff. Over the last 5 or 6 years, Bigfoot's turned into an interdimensional being, super smart, extraterrestrial. I can't rule it out. I mean, of course not, but I don't think that there's anything to that. But I mean, you're going about this. You're getting financing. You're doing, you're taking international trips. You're looking after evidence. So I doubt you think it's an interdimensional or ET, but what do you think it is?
No. Well, Neanderthals, if you got a Neanderthal, washed him, gave him a haircut, put him in modern day clothes, he could walk around in any city of the world, and he'd pretty much go unnoticed.
They sort of look like
a little bit ugly by our standards.
They sort of look like Nick Tortelli. Do you remember Cheers and Carlo's ex-husband, Nick Tortelli?
Yeah.
I always figured he's sort of like what Neanderthals would look like.
Yeah. Well, most non-African people have got at least 4% Neanderthal genes in them because we interbred with the Neanderthals.
Right.
Neanderthals were very sophisticated. They made fire, they made clothes, they made weapons, they made art, they made jewellery. Whatever these things are, they're not Neanderthals. They're too big and they're too primitive. And Neanderthals had very big noses as well. It was all to deal with the cold. They had very big noses with blood vessels in them to deal with breathing in cold air. They were cold adapted. Whereas the yeti has a much more flattened nose, much more like the nose of a gorilla. So the yeti, I think, could be a descendant of the robust Australopithecine, like Paranthropus robustus, which was living alongside our own ancestor, Australopithecus afarensis, on the plains of East Africa a couple of million years ago. They were bigger, they had more powerful jaws to process harder food stuff like roots and nuts, and they could have also crunched up bone as well with these big jaws. So, whereas Australopithecus afarensis evolved ultimately into us, I think this other lineage became the larger type of yeti, and the yeren in China, which is essentially the same thing. And in India, they call it Mandavarum, but it's all essentially the same thing.
Do you think it would be like a Homo robustus or like a, Mega Australopithecus robustus?
Well, it'd be up to whoever finally gets the type specimen to name it. But they probably crossed over the land bridge, the Bering Strait, and got into North America that way.
Right.
Because there was a land bridge, that was heavily forested. It wasn't ice, it was proper land that was forested. And a lot of animals got over that way. Elephants got over that way. And horses evolved in North America, and they came the other way into Europe.
Right.
And became extinct in North America until Europeans brought them back. So there was a crossover from the Americas into Asia and Asia into the Americas.
Who do you think followed who? Do you think the humans followed we'll just call them Yetis, or do you think that the Yetis sort of followed the humans? Like, what, do you think they were sort of living a little bit off each other? One was scavenging off the other, or parallel plane, or neither? The
robust Australopithecines and our own ancestors were around at the same time in East Africa. So they were probably spread out together, and they probably crossed over the land bridge at around about the same time, I would have thought.
Do they live in colonies? Are they in family groups? Are they in like tribes, clans?
They seem to be more solitary. They don't live in big groups in the way that gorillas and chimpanzees do. They seem to be solitary or live in small family groups. It's very rare you get stories of whole hordes of them being together. Very rare indeed.
Anyways, I don't know if people realize that the gorillas live in like groups of like a few dozen, and chimpanzees, I think, are in even bigger groups.
Yeah. Orangs are solitary. Orangutans, they only come together to mate, or to when there's a food source, a big food source, they'll all come together.
Yeah, that's why they were the scientists in Planet of the Apes. They were sort of the elitists, the snobs, and the priests and the.
Planet of the Apes is that, well, the original one anyway, they portrayed gorillas as savage and chimpanzees as gentle, where in reality it's completely the other way around. For all their immense strength, gorillas are not very aggressive unless you make them angry. They're really laid back, whereas chimpanzees are one of the most aggressive and dangerous animals going.
Yes, I just watched Chimp Crazy, and it seems like they like to rip people's faces off at some point. I mean, I don't think they like to. You don't try and keep a 35-year-old chimpanzee as your friend. I mean, is sort of the moral of that story. I mean, obviously it's scared and trying to get away or whatever, but you know, the instinct to rip a face off is still, you know, not cool.
They are super aggressive animals, and when they go for you, if you're a man, the first thing they'll go for is your genitals. They'll try and pull your balls off. Oh,
well, that's, I mean, I don't know if that's as bad as ripping the face off, but it's definitely a close second. I guess depending on how old you are and if you've had children already. Anyway, either one is rather unpleasant, and you know, I mean, one is, you know, it's ripping away your identity. The other is emasculating, and I don't think that the animal has that kind of concept. It must be some sort of instinct from, you know, competing with the other males in its own group, you know, to make you ugly and infertile or something like that.
But they're about 6 times as strong as a man, and they have teeth like knives.
Well, that doesn't sound like fun. All right, well, no fighting with chimpanzees, and you know, anyway, watch Chimp Crazy with it. Well, don't watch it. Just don't keep a chimpanzee as a pet, or any great ape, or really any wild animal. It's stupid. But all right, so I assume you're still on the track of the Yetis or whatever, by whatever name they go by. Where do you think that you had like the closest hit or closest call to finding one?
Goodness. There were a couple of times. The last time I was in Sumatra, when I was in the jungle, we heard the call of the orangutan there. And it was coming from behind a stand of bamboo, about 20 to 25 feet away. Mm-hmm. And a colleague of mine said he would run around the side of this stand of bamboo to frighten it out while I was there with the camera waiting for it. He ran around, caught a very brief glimpse of something, running off into the jungle, because instead of running around the stand of bamboo, it ran off at an angle back into the jungle. So I was very close that time. I mean, if I'd have gone round with the camera instead, I may have got it on film. But it was like a split-second decision. The other time was in Russia, near a little village called Neutrino. And about 3 miles outside of Neutrino is an old abandoned farmhouse that has been abandoned since the 1970s. 73, I think it was abandoned there. And we went with a bunch of Ukrainian and Russian scientists. This is before
I assumed.
All of Putin's insane bargain basement Hitler shenanigans. One of these, an archaeologist called Anatoly Serendenko, had seen an Almasty very close to this old abandoned farmhouse some years before. And there was another story about some shepherds who'd been on the veranda of this old farmhouse. When the door at the end of the veranda opened, a 7-foot Almasty was there, and it walked along the veranda, picked up one of these guys, just moved him out of the way, went to the end of the veranda and jumped off the veranda. So we staked this place out, and we put up camera traps all around it, and we put up meat and fruit and honey as lures, as bait, and then we just stayed on the veranda and waited until it got dark. Now, several of the witnesses we spoke to, including one of the Ukrainian scientists that were with us, Gregory Panchenko, who's a biologist, he had seen an Almasty as well in a different old abandoned farmhouse. Not the same one, but he said it was making a noise like a bird twittering. And we heard this again and again from witnesses. They'll make a twittering noise like a bird. About 10 o'clock at night, when it's really dark, we heard a twittering noise. And all of the birds would have been in their nests by then. one of the camera captures went off, there was a flash. I thought, wow, have we got one? Was that an owl massey I just heard? But then nothing more happened, and it got to about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we went inside the farm to get warm around an old stove and on one of the old-fashioned ranges that they had. And one of my friends fell asleep on a manky old mattress. And there was myself and a guy called Adam Davis, who's another cryptozoologist, there's another Brit. He's moved to America now. He does a lot of Bigfoot research. You might have heard of him, Adam Davis. Well, we were sitting together in this room, and the door was slightly ajar, and there was moonlight and starlight coming in. And from outside, we hear a deep guttural vocalization, sort of bum, bum, bum sound. It sounded like whatever made it had very big lungs, a big chest. And I said to Adam, did you hear that? And Adam goes, yeah. Then about 25 seconds later, something walked along the veranda, and as it passed the door, it blocked out the moonlight and the starlight to a height of 7 feet. So whatever it was on 2 legs, and it was very tall. I said to Adam, it's out on the veranda. We grabbed our cameras and went running out, but whatever it was, it vanished back into the night. We did a circuit of the farm, couldn't find anything. In the morning, we checked the camera traps, but all we got was vegetation moving about. So, was I 12 foot away from an owl massey? I don't know. But if it was a bear, it would have made much more noise. You'd have heard it claws on the wood, and it wouldn't have been walking along on its hind legs.
Right. How do you like train yourself for climate? Acclimatization. I mean, sometimes you're in the jungle in the tropics. Sometimes it sounds like you're in a desert, or in the a high desert, or in where it's much colder. Or how do you deal with it? Do you have to fly somewhere, get somewhere, and spend 2 or 3 days just getting used to climate before you embark on your journey?
No, we just plunge in at the deep end. We can't really afford to do that. In the ideal world, if we had enough money, we would be out in these places for months on end at a time. Because, as any wildlife cameraman will tell you, you have to spend months looking for things. And even then you have to be lucky to get them on film. When they first tried to film snow leopards in the wild, we already know they existed. They had them in captivity. No one had filmed them in the wild. This was the early 70s. It took them something like 6 or 7 years to find and film snow leopards in the wild. But the only place I've had real trouble with the climate was Guyana in South America, because we were on the grasslands rather than the jungle. And we got the wrong time of year. We'd gone in the dry season, and they were experiencing a drought that was so savage that even the natives had never known anything like it, and that was murder. It was so blisteringly hot, unrelentingly hot, and with no shade. It was the toughest expedition I've ever done.
All right, I have one more of my standard Jeff sort of goofy questions, and then we're going to go straight into the actual creatures, animals that you found. But I don't know how good you are with your Old Testament. I'm not so good, but I'm sure you're aware of Leviathan and Behemoth. What do you suppose those things were?
Well, Leviathan was in Hebrew law a sea dragon. It was supposed to be a gigantic creature that was representative of the power of God. But if you go back further, you can see that comes from the Babylonian sea goddess Tiamat, who was a sea dragon and representative of chaos. And if you go back further, there's the Sumerian Ker, who was the god of the underworld, who lived in the void beneath the world, and he was a dragon as well. So dragons are intimately associated with the element of water rather than fire. In Europe and parts of Indonesia and Hawaii, they're linked with fire, but around the rest of the world, it's usually water, having power over the ancient waters, and the idea of chaos and rainfall and the flowing of rivers. That's linked with the most ancient dragon legends. And the oldest one actually comes from South Africa. There are cave paintings of these serpentine creatures that seem to be bringing rain. They seem to be sweating or bleeding rain from their bodies. And that's 75,000 years old. Now, Behemoth That was another Hebrew thing, and it's variously been interpreted as a rhinoceros, a hippopotamus, an elephant, or a great bull. We do know there was a type of giant wild cattle called the aurochs, which they're the ancestors of today's cow, but they were enormous. They were almost as big as rhinos, and they had huge horns, and they were supposed to be absolutely ferocious. They had much longer legs than modern cattle, and they could run fast. And they were hunted into extinction in 15th or 16th century. The last ones were in Poland. But they were the ancestor of our domestic cattle. But who the hell got the idea to go up and try and milk a wild auroch? And how did they survive? I don't know. So that the behemoth probably was the auroch originally.
Interesting. Okay, that all makes sense. All right, Mongolian Death Worm.
My favourite expedition I've ever done was to Mongolia. We had 3 weeks in the Gobi Desert, and we went for about 1,000 miles through the Gobi Desert, which is the most alien environment I've ever been in. You think of deserts as sandy, and some parts of the Gobi they look like the surface of Mars with this reddish sand, but other parts look like giant cat litter trays stretching off into infinity, and other parts look like Mordor from The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, all black, twisted rock. And then, yet, other parts, an area of the desert they call the mirror, because it's all chips of mica and it all reflects. And we saw mirages. You hear about mirages, but you actually see them when you're in the desert, what looks like lakes, but it's just heat haze, or what looks like cities with ziggurats and arabesque towers in silhouette in the distance. Right. It's just a weird effect of the heat haze. We got caught in a tornado. One time we were in an oasis and we were looking out into the desert, and there was what looked like a little dust devil.
You didn't. So you thought you found Shangri-La, but it was just an illusion. It was just Shambhala. Yeah, it was like a little dust devil. It got bigger and bigger and closer and closer. We thought it was going to go around the other side of the oasis, but all of a sudden it was on the camp, and it was incredibly destructive force. I was clinging to the side of one of these ex-Soviet army vans that we were using, and one of my cameras got completely sandblasted. The lens of it got totally sandblasted and destroyed. I looked up and I saw one of our drivers 15 feet in the air, hanging onto the shredded remains of a tent going round and round and round. And I was like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, like in the eye of this storm. And then as quickly as it came, it had gone and totally decimated the camp. It was an incredible adventure. We went to these really remote oases in the desert where very few people ever go, and ancient ruined temples have been reclaimed by the sand. But the death worm itself is greatly feared, very greatly feared. The nomads we talked to, and we talked about 2 different witnesses, and they include one old man who'd seen it in his youth back in the 1930s, and all the way up to a young guy who'd seen it just the year before. And they described an animal looking very like a salami or a graft excluder, sort of sausage shaped, browny red, scaly, hard to tell which end was the head and which end was the tail. They say that the electrical blast it's supposed to have, they call it throwing lightning. They say that's legend, that's folklore, it doesn't actually do that. Yeah. But they do believe that it's venomous and it can sting. And they're very frightened of it. One guy said he'd come across one while tending his parents' goats and camels one day in his youth, and he ran back and told his parents, and they were so frightened that they rallied up all their animals, packed up the gur, which is the circular tents they have, and moved out of an area. A death worm fighting can throw a whole area into a panic. We met an old retired army colonel at an old army base near the borders of China. And he said in the 1970s he'd been patrolling one morning and he saw one of them lying in the desert. At first he thought it was a section of tyre,
until he got up close to it. And he said that it had the morning dew on the scales of its back, and it was catching the light, and there was a sort of glittering effect on it. And he thinks that's where the legend of the electricity comes from. Who else? We talked to another man who's actually used a stick to pick one up. He put it underneath it and lifted it up to get a closer look at it. We talked to another guy who had seen one emerge from a hole and kill and eat a mouse. He said that when he was young, some Russian scientists had killed one of these things with a stone and took it away. So in some Russian museum, it's possible that there's a specimen of the death worm, in formaldehyde or something, or locked away in a drawer and forgotten about. Because that happens quite a lot. Specimens of things are taken into museums, and then they're lost or mislabeled over the years, because museums have about 90% of their specimens off show.
Right.
For instance, the Natural History Museum in London has about 70 million specimens. Only a few of them are ever on show at any one time. There was a Natural History Museum in Paris, in France, and they've got completely unlabeled a stuffed giant gecko about 3 feet long, and it had been on display for ages. And it just happens one day some gecko expert walks in, sees this, and freaks out because it's the biggest gecko of all time, and it's an unknown species, and they named it Delcourt giant gecko, and they worked out by looking at it and comparing it to other species of gecko that it probably lived on New Caledonia, but that's all they know about it. They don't know when this specimen was collected and by whom, because they've lost all the notes for it. So it's one of the people we talked to in Sumatra about the orangutan death, a woman called Debbie Martha. She's retired now, but she was the head of the Indonesian tiger conservation group, and she'd seen orangutan death 4 times in the jungle. She said she's almost certain that in some Dutch museum there are skulls and bones from orangutan neck that have been mislabeled as orangutan because it used to be a Dutch colony. So it'd be interesting to go through them with a fine comb and have a look.
Yeah, well, maybe one day you will. What were some of the other animals at the beginning of the show that you ticked off? I have to be frank. After besides Yeti and Mongolian Death Worm, I blanked out.
The Tasmanian Wolf.
Yeah, let's go with that.
The thylacine. This is probably the most iconic, supposedly extinct animal after the dodo, and it's the animal we chose for the Centre for 14 Zoology logo. So if you look up the CFZ, you'll see that our logo is the Tasmanian Wolf. It's also known as the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger,
right. And
it was a flesh-eating marsupial. It was about the size of an Alsatian dog. It had a very long, stiff, kangaroo-like tail. It had these stripes down its back and immensely powerful jaws that it could open much wider than a wolf. It wasn't related to wolves or dogs at all, despite its looks. It was an example of convergent evolution. That's where 2 unrelated species, often on separate sides of the world, evolved to look like each other because they're doing similar things in their own ecosystem. So, for instance, the boa family, they're not closely related to pythons at all, but they have similar lifestyles, so they look similar. The vultures you get in the Americas, in North America, Central America, South America, they're not at all related to the vultures you get in Africa and Asia. The African and Asian ones are true birds of prey, whereas the New World ones are more closely related to storks, but they just resemble each other because they're doing a similar thing. And it's the same with the thylacine, because it was living a lifestyle not unlike that of a wolf, actually more like a coyote than a wolf. It evolved a similar look about it, but it was a marsupial. It raised its young in a pouch like a kangaroo, and it didn't hunt in packs like wolves. It hunted alone or in pairs. Its jaws were more powerful than a wolf's jaws, but it killed in a different way. Wolves hunt in packs, and they'll swarm around animals as big as bison and moose and stuff, and actually start to eat them alive. They'll hang on to them and bite at them, whereas the Tasmanian wolf seemed to ambush its prey, bite it, and kill it with one bite, rather than going in a huge pack. Now, the thing about the Tasmanian wolf was it used to be found on New Guinea, Australia, and Tasmania. It was thought to have died out in New Guinea and Australia about 5,000 years ago, for reasons we're not sure about. Possibly diseases brought over by other animals that were brought into Australia, like the dingo, which was brought in by the Aborigines. It may have carried some sort of disease with it, but they were never introduced into Tasmania. It was still on Tasmania, and then Europeans got to Tasmania. The first thing they did was wipe out the Tasmanian emu, which was a distinct species of emu adapted for a cold, wet climate. Tasmania is not like the rest of Australia. It's cold and wet. It's more like England. It rains all the time. It's cold. And then they hunted the Tasmanian Aborigines. They hunted them. They went beating for them, like beating for birds, and just shot them. And because they brought sheep with them, and the Tasmanian wolf was attacking their sheep, they put bounties out on it, and these things were snared and poisoned and shot en masse. And the last known one died at the nearest zoo in Hobart in, I think it was 1937. And after that, it was declared extinct. But since that time, there have been around 4,000 sightings of the Tasmanian wolf, including one by a zoologist who's out looking for birds. It's called Hans Narding, and he saw one at night by the torchlight 20 feet away from it. The park warden had seen them. I've been over there 3 times now. I've spoken to people that have seen them. I spoke to one guy, sadly passed away now, but in the 1970s, he was working for a hydroelectric scheme, and he was driving to work with 5 of his friends, and they all saw this Tasmanian wolf as it stepped out into the road in front of their car, and they had it in view for quite a long time. We talked to another guy who runs an arboretum, and he had seen one with his wife, and it's running by the side of the road by a barbed wire fence, looking to get under the fence. And there was another car full of people behind them that stopped and saw this thing, and they reported it to a newspaper, the people in the car behind, because there was a story about it. Another guy we talked to was a government licensed shooter who goes out and calls feral cats, because cats are a bloody menace. Wherever they get established, they cause the extinction of small mammals and birds. For example, there was a little island called Stevenson's Island between the 2 main islands of New Zealand. And on Stevenson's Island there was a species of wren called the Stevenson's Island wren, found nowhere else in the world. And it was flightless like the Dodo. And it ran around on the floor like a mouse, because it had no predators. It was a tiny little bird that was flightless. They opened a lighthouse. They got a lighthouse, and a lighthouse keeper brought a cat. Cat killed every last one of them. So cats are a menace, because they'll kill and kill and kill and kill for the hell of it. And he goes out shooting cats, and he goes right into the bush, and he had seen the Tasmanian wolf twice. On one occasion, I was out in a very remote area, going down this path to the forest, and all the old bushmen back in the 19th and early 20th century that were familiar with the Tasmanian wolf, they said it smelt like a hyena, because a lot of them had been in the Boer War and they'd been over to South Africa, and then they were familiar with hyenas, the distinctive smell of a hyena. And I know what hyenas smell like, and I got this smell exactly like a hyena on this path. It's as if something had minutes before had just walked across this path and left a scent behind it. And it lingered for a while, and then it was gone. But another guy I met, he saw one back in the 1950s, and his son had seen one just the year before we were there, and he found tracks, and showed us photographs of these tracks, and they were very distinctive. They looked exactly like the tracks of a Tasmanian wolf. So, of all the cryptids, if you ask me to pick the ones I think were most likely to exist, it would be the Tasmanian Wolf and the Orangatan.
What about the giant sloth? Was that something that was extinct, but it's not extinct, or am I imagining that I read something about that?
Well, there's a theory that giant sloths still exist in South America. The giant ground sloths, they ranged in size from about the size of a gorilla up to the size of an Asian elephant.
Wow.
There's a number of different types of them. And a medium-sized one, they were called mylodons. There's a theory that they survive in the jungles of South America. We know they were around till about 8,000 years ago. We've found caves that have been actually clawed out by these things. We've found pelts from them. And the distinctive thing about mylodons is that they have, in their skin, they have little nodules of bone to make a natural armour in the skin. Quite unlike any other animal. And in South America, a lot of the tribes speak about this thing called the Mapangaure. They said it's this great hairy creature with huge claws, and they believe it has a second mouth in its stomach that has a foul stench coming out of it, and it makes a roaring sound like a jet engine, and they say it's invulnerable to spears and arrows except in its stomach. Now, it's been theorised that the Mapangaure is the ground sloth, and that the second mouth in its stomach is actually a gland that makes this foul smell. And the hide would be very hard to pierce because of the little nodules of bone in it. And the only place it didn't have these nodules of bone was on its belly. There's an ornithologist called Dr. David Oren from the Gowaldi Museum of Natural History. He's been on the track of ground sloths in South America for many years now. So it's far from impossible that there are ground sloths in the depths of the Amazon.
And then they actually have an Achilles heel, except it's an Achilles like belly button.
Yeah.
All right. I know this is probably rank speculation, but it sounds to me, well, this part it isn't, is that it sounds to me like you've been on 6 out of the 7 continents, doing investigations, tracking, researching, whichever terms apply. Have you been to Antarctica? And if the answer is, well, either way, what do you think would be found if we were able to get into the, and I know it's a giant continent underneath, probably about the size of Australia or whatnot itself. But what kind of animals, what kind of creatures do you think we'd find there? Do you think it would be like more of the same with just standard diversity, or do you think we'd find things completely new?
Well, Antarctica is so cold that there are no naturally occurring land mammals there.
I mean, under the ice, it wasn't always under the ice in the in the fossil record or in
the fossil record. Yeah, well, people have studied the fossil record of Antarctica, and there've been all sorts of things turned up. There used to be marsupials there, like there were in Australia. I believe dinosaur fossils have been found from Antarctica. Because it wasn't always cold, it was connected with Australia at one point, and due to the continental shift, it went down into a cold area, and all the land animals died out. Right? So the only things you really get on land are birds like penguins, and they're around the fringes of it, and it's only really the emperor penguin that goes inland. When you get deep inland, there's virtually no life at all in Antarctica.
That's until we find it, or until we find that portal to Hollow Earth that's supposed to be in there as well. All right. What are you hot on the trail of now?
At the minute, we have several plans that haven't yet been finalised. They're a little up in the air at the minute.
Who's we? What's the group called?
Oh, the Centre for Protein Zoology, which is the organisation I work for. We're a group of people. It's international. We have an office in the States, an office in Canada, an office in Australia, an office in New Zealand, and we organise these expeditions to go around the world looking for things. Sometimes we go with television companies to make documentaries, but mostly just by ourselves.
Is it for profit? Is it not for profit? Do you get grants, donations?
Occasionally, you'll get backing, mainly from a television company that wants to make a documentary. That's very rare. We travel to places to lecture, and we write books and magazine articles and things as well. At the minute, we're in discussion with a French and German science channel that makes documentaries about possibly going to the island of Flores in Indonesia to look for Homo floresiensis, the little hobbit people. On the eastern end of the island, there are still reports of these things being alive in the mountains. And there's an anthropologist called Gregory Ford, a very sober, level-headed scientist who's been collecting these reports. And he wrote a book called Between Ape and Human, which is absolutely fascinating, which is about the discovery of Homo floresiensis. And there's also a chapter on the possible survival of it on the eastern part of the island. So that may be our next target. We're also looking at the possibility of doing a series about giant crocodiles, going looking for the biggest crocodiles in the world, some of which have reached sort of mythical status. There's one along a river in New Guinea, for example, that's venerated as a sort of water deity, because the people say it's lived in this lagoon for 50 years, never eaten anybody, and it protects them from the other crocodiles. It's a big male chasing the other males out of its territory, and they look on it as a sort of guardian. Whereas in other areas, there's like Gustav, the killer crocodile of Lake Tanganyika, who reputedly has eaten 300 people, and it's still out there somewhere. And there are a number of these big crocs around the world that we don't want to go and look for. I want to go back to Tasmania again, and I want to do Iriomote Island, which is off the coast of southern Japan. It's on this archipelago of semi-tropical islands, and this island is a very small human population, and there are stories from deep in the jungle in this island of a completely undiscovered species of big cat. In 1969, they found a wild cat, a new species of wild cat and they named it the Iriomote cat, which is about the size of a domestic cat, but it was completely unknown to science. But people there say there is a much bigger one, the size of a medium-sized dog, which has tiger-like markings and lives deep in the jungle. It may be a relative of the cloudy leopard, which we don't know, but no one's gone to look for it. No one's done a serious search for this thing, and you'll find that again and again.
Well, it's on the way. Japan is on the way to Indonesia. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, you'll find this again and again, that there are certain things that no one has ever gone and looked at. For example, the world and his wife are looking for Bigfoot. There's loads of people looking for Bigfoot. But there's a lake called Lake Chani in Siberia, where over the past 20 years or so, 18 people have been killed and eaten by something in the lake, which the local villagers around the lake say it rams boats. When people fall into the water, it grabs them and eats them. I say serpentine, about 30 feet long. There's one case of a woman watching her son from the bank. He was fishing on a boat. He was a soldier. And this thing ran the boat. He fell into the water. It grabbed him. He was never seen again. Another guy was out fishing with his friend when the creature ran the boat. He made it to shore, but his friend was dragged under. And they've asked for an official government investigation, and the government just gave them a brush off. They say, oh, people are getting drunk on vodka and drowning. The sort of drowning that chews you up and spits you out in little pieces.
Right, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's...
Nobody's ever... And I tried before the Cold War reared its head again, when Russia and the West were on good terms, I tried to get TV companies interested in doing this killer lake monster. It's a fascinating story. It's like a horror novel when you look at it, and it would make a stunning documentary going after with underwater cameras and bait and talking to relatives of the victims. No one was interested in it. I've been over to Tajikistan in Central Asia 3 times, looking for a tiger called the Caspian tiger, which was supposed to have died out in the 1970s. Around about 1970, the last one was supposed to have been killed. But I've spoken to a park ranger who saw one of them months to the day before we came. I've spoken to hunters who've had when they've shot wild goats, the tigers nicked, come in and grabbed the goat and ran off with it. Farmers who've lost livestock to it, hikers that have seen it, honey farmers that have seen it, all sorts of things. The last time we were there, we talked to a shepherd whose dogs had treed a tiger in the same valley we were in whilst we were there, but we were 2 hours further up the valley. He heard his dogs going berserk one night, and he came out and saw them all around a tree, and he shot his torch into a tree, and there was a tiger in the tree, so he called his dogs off. The tiger came down and ran off. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people I've spoken to, everyday people, from soldiers, farmers, the park rangers, they've all seen tigers that are supposed to have been extinct for 50 years. So, after my first expedition there, I've been over there 3 times now, after my first expedition, I wrote all this up about all of these sightings, all the people I've spoken to, and I sent my information to every single tiger conservation group I could find online, and the silence was deafening. Only one of them got back to me, and they said, "Oh, this is interesting, but we only deal with the Siberian tiger." None of the others showed the slightest bit of interest whatsoever.
How do they know there's a difference between a Siberian tiger, a Bengal tiger, and a Caspian tiger? I mean, the animal doesn't know borders. I mean, it's. I mean, I'm sure there's differences in fur, thickness and maybe size and whatnot.
There's no genetic differences in all of the tigers. They can all interbreed still, but there are small genetic differences. But for example, the Siberian tiger is the biggest, and it's got very long hair because it lives in a very cold place. Tigers are evolved in cold environments and move down into warmer jungle environments gradually over millions of years. The Caspian tiger is similar in that it lives in an environment that gets quite cold in winter. It lives up in the mountains. And all the witnesses say it comes down from the mountains in winter, and that's when it starts preying on livestock. But nobody is interested. Nobody is slightly.
That's weird. I mean, maybe because the area is it's sort of an unstable part of the world, but still, you'd think they'd be interested. If you're willing to go with your crew.
But you could say it's very stable, and it's very friendly towards the West. It's not like Afghanistan. It's a very, very stable, very civilized, friendly country.
Okay. Well, I don't know why people aren't interested in that. It certainly sounds interesting. Maybe these shows will help with that. In the beginning, you were talking to me about Doctor Who, how there was a race of sort of humanoid dinosaurs who had been hiding, basically, and came back and wondered what happened to their planet. Who are these hairless monkeys that are taking over everything? And it reminded me of a movie I saw in the 1970s called Gargoyles, which
I know Gargoyles. Yeah,
which is sort of the same story, except it's like every 10,000 years, and then it's do you? I mean, are there animals like that do prolonged hibernations? And I'm not saying in millions of years or thousands of years, and maybe there are, I don't know. But, are there any animals that possibly hibernate for decades or hundreds of years that are sizable, that, one day we open up the wrong mine or go into the wrong desert and
they tend to be very small ones. There's a type of moth in the Arctic that lives a very long time as a caterpillar. It will wake up for a few weeks every year when there's a thaw, and it will eat and eat and eat, and then go back into hibernation. And it will wake up the next year, eat and eat and eat, and go back into hibernation, until eventually it pupates into this little tiny moth. But it has such a long lifespan that it spends most of it in hibernation. There's a cave-dwelling salamander in Eastern Europe called the olm. they live they're blind and they live in these cave systems where there's very little food. And they've been recorded to go without food and to barely move for up to 12 years. They'll just stay there with the oxygenated water going across their gills and do nothing for 12 years.
That's, well, animals, I guess, have different priorities than we do. Maybe that's their version of Netflix and chill. But no reptilian overlords coming anytime soon that you can tell.
No, there was a theory. There was a theory once that if non-avian dinosaurs hadn't become extinct, that certain lineages of them would have become super intelligent and evolved opposable thumbs and technology and things like that. But most people think that's very, very anthropomorphic view.
Yeah.
Of how evolution would work.
Well, yeah, it can't be disproven, I guess, is the best that they can say. But
we still have dinosaurs today because technically birds are dinosaurs.
That's what I've heard, but I'm not that afraid of most birds. I think I'd be more afraid of most dinosaurs. But going back to the saltwater crocodiles, I by coincidence, I recently read a book. It was actually fairly awful, but it spent a lot of time on saltwater crocodiles. And apparently, they're really smart, or at least when it comes to killing and stalking and planning how to kill. I don't know if they're smart in any other way, shape, or form, but I assume that the author did their research there. And apparently they can lie in wait for, weeks and weeks and watch patterns of what's going to happen. And then they swoop, they swoop in and they plan ambushes, and somehow they coordinate their kills almost like pods of orcas. And is there truth to that? Or was that just artistic license?
Well, lots of species of crocodile, Nile crocodiles, mother crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, they all do that. They will look at where animals or people go to drink or draw water and remember it, and then go for them there. But they do much more than that. They've been known to climb on top of each other and form living walls in the water to corral fish into an area. The mugger crocodile will put logs and branches on its nose and lie in the water like that, and when a bird comes and perches on it, they'll grab the bird. So they're tool using. They've been known to kill fish, and then rather than eat the fish, use the fish to bait bigger animals in so they can kill and eat the bigger animals. And when they're dismembering something large, and there's several crocodiles, they'll anchor it and take turns. Some of them will anchor it in the water where others will do the death roll and spin around, rip off chunks of meat to swallow, and then they'll swap over so everybody gets a turn. They're surprisingly social animals, and they, outside of the breeding season, and they show a lot of coordination and intelligence.
That's wild. Nobody thinks of reptiles as being particularly smart, but that is really smart behavior. And I guess that's why the crocodilians are one of the 5 animals that we're aware of that has lived through all 5 major extinction events. So, yeah. Was there anything on the list there that we didn't cover that was particularly... He said something about pink-head ducks or something like that.
Pink-headed duck. Yeah, now I haven't been on a trail of the pink-headed duck myself. A guy I know called Richard Corns has been over to Burma a number of times looking for it. And the pink-headed duck was a type of duck that had a pink head.
Oh, sure.
And it was very common in Asia, in tropical Asia, in India and Burma or Myanmar, as they call it now, and places like that. And then suddenly, in the 1930s and the 1940s, there seemed to be a population crash, and it vanished, and no one knows why. It wasn't through hunting, because people never hunted them for food, and it wasn't through habitat loss, because the habitat was still there. They just seemed to vanish. There are stories of them surviving in remote lakes in Myanmar, Burma, which is hard to get into because it's, dodgy government. But this guy, Richard Corns, has been over there, and he's gone to places that foreigners aren't supposed to go to, quite illegally looking for this thing, and he's talked to people that have seen it. So it could be that it's still there in these remote lakes, and that the government stance on letting people in is actually protecting it because no one can find it. Nobody knows where it is. Like the great ivory-billed woodpecker, maybe surviving in Cuba.
Interesting. Any unicorns?
The unicorn. No, the unicorn may have had its genesis with a type of antelope called Procamptoceras. Procamptoceras lived in Europe about 1 million years ago. And it had two horns, but they were so close together that in life they would have been covered with one sheet. And instead of pointing backwards like that, like most antelope horns do, they pointed forward, and they would have been together and covered in one sheet. So you've had a four-legged, superficially goat-like animal with what appears to be one horn. So that may have been where the idea of the unicorn started, particularly if fossil bones that were found by early Europeans.
Oh, that's cool.
But another thing about the unicorn is that this was discovered by an American scientist called Dr. Henry Dove. He found that a lot of African tribes manipulate the horns of male goats when they're young. When a goat is born, it has what they call horn buds. They're embedded in the skin. And what they do is they send down chemical signals into the skull to make the horns grow up through the horn buds. But the horn buds are soft and they can be manipulated. And if you push the horn buds together, instead of two horns growing backwards, you'll get one great sharp horn coming out of the goat's forehead. And he found that in the male goats, when this was done to them, they became dominant over all of the others, and they became like the leaders of the group, and they would defend the other goats from predators with this like rhinoceros-like horn they had. So that's another area of another part of the unicorn legend that would have been interesting to early explorers. Because if you look at medieval unicorn drawings, you always see they've got a cloven hoof. They don't have horse-like hooves, a single hoof. They have a cloven hoof like a goat or an antelope.
Yeah, everything gets bigger and prettier with and more elaborate with time.
Yeah.
The dragons go from being like, sort of dog or chicken size to, being, Godzilla sized or whatever.
Well, they were always, in legend, dragons were always meant to be huge. When you see the little pictures of them being slain by knights and they're about the size of a dog or a swan, that is a artistic choice because it's usually St. George and it's about Christian belief driving out paganism. So the dragon representing paganism is small, and St. George and his horse are big. But if you look at actual legends of dragons, they would have been big enough to swallow St. George and the horse he was riding whole.
Well, it sounds like the legend of dragons is sort of universal and associated with water and things like that. Yeah. Is there some animal, some biological evidence of, some sort of giant reptile or lizard that
Well, I've written widely on this. I've written 2 books on dragons and dragon lore, and I've written whole sections of other books about dragons because they're the most universal and ancient of all the monsters. Forget about demons and zombies and werewolves and vampires. They're Johnny-come-lately. The archetype of the dragon is the most ancient and powerful and widespread of all monster archetypes. Now, certainly some of them refer to very big crocodiles, and some of them may refer to huge constricting snakes, like pythons, and some of them may refer to very big lizards. Now, we know that the Komodo dragon can go to 10 feet long, but there was a prehistoric relative of the Komodo dragon that lived on Australia called Varanus priscus, more popularly known by its common name of Megalania. And that is only known from fragmentary remains, but that may have been 30 feet long. And there are persistent stories from the jungles of New Guinea of giant lizards far bigger than the Komodo dragon. So this and the discovery of the fossil bones of dinosaurs and other large extinct animals would have added to it. But the interesting thing is that dragons are still reported today. literal four-legged, two-winged, fire-breathing dragon, which seems to be biologically impossible. The guy I mentioned earlier on, Lars Thomas, who does our hair analysis for us, he's a Danish biologist. He was contacted by a man a few years ago when the Icelandic volcano went off, and a lot of the world's planes were, for a few weeks, not allowed to fly. And he said he was watching this thing through binoculars. He was watching the plumes of ash come up, and he saw what he thought was a plane flying around in the ash. And he said, and then the plane started to beat its wings. And he said, I realised that I was looking at a dragon. It's either I've gone mad or I've seen a dragon. Just last year, 27th of December last year, at a place called Waverley Abbey in England, a group of 10 people who were ghost hunting claimed to have seen dragons flying over the abbey. Now, I've gone and interviewed 5 of that 10, and none of them are mad. They were all... the thing about them that impressed me was their lack of exaggeration. They just told you what they saw. And they were adamant that these things weren't birds. They had bat-like wings. They were far too big to be birds. There were 2 smaller ones that had about 10-foot wingspans, and then a much, much bigger one that was seen away over some woods in the distance. Now, it's obvious that these aren't flesh and blood animals in the way that we understand it, because they would be seen. They're flying around the air. They'd be seen all the time. They'd attack planes. They'd attack people. They'd turn up on radar. So I think what we're dealing with here is some sort of genuinely paranormal manifestation. And I've been collecting stories of dragon sightings from all over the world, and they're surprisingly common, and they seem to be on the increase, particularly in Asia. Like there's even a story from Wisconsin, from Oconto Falls in Wisconsin. Are you familiar with the lady that did the Grey Road books, the Beast of Grey Road, Linda Godfrey? It's called Linda Godfrey.
No, I have to say not.
She's sadly passed away now, but she did a book called American Monsters, and she interviewed a bunch of people from this town in Wisconsin called Oconto Falls. I think it was 2012. They all swear that they saw this white dragon, and its scales were like mother of pearl, white. And it had 4 legs which it held up close to its body. It's the size of a plane, great bat-like wings, long tail, wedge-shaped head. And they said when it spat fire, it didn't come out in a jet like you see in film. It came out in a ball, like a ball of flame. And a lot of the early representations of dragons, they have this ball of flame.
Well,
and all across Asia you get these stories as well. And like I say, I'm not suggesting that this is an animal in the way that the other creatures we've been talking about today are animals, special good animals like you and me. This is something genuinely weird, genuinely paranormal. And it's something that I tackle in my new book, The Highest Strangeness, which is about very high strangeness, 40 cases, monsters, ghosts, UFOs, other entities.
Oh, excellent. Well, I mean, listen, we got to dragons, so that's certainly the Garden of Doomed Spirits. So, and we've been going for about an hour and 20 minutes, which is usually around the happy spot. So, I think this is a really good time for A, if I forgot to ask you about anything, or if there's something that you want to add, and B, tell everyone where they can follow you, and find your books and help the organization, all that other good stuff.
Yeah, well, the Centre for Fortean Zoology, if you type that in, you'll get our website, or just type in www.csz.org.uk. You can contact me on my email, which is dr3uk@yahoo.com. And if you type in Richard Freeman onto Amazon or eBay in the books, you'll get my books. I've written a lot of books. I've written 10 books today, so The Highest Strangeness is just the latest of them.
Sounds like a lot of fun. And if you send me all that stuff, I'll just copy and paste it into the show notes. Is there any sort of song that you sort of associate with this monster cryptid hunting?
Well, there's the Kate Bush's song Wild Man, which is about Yeti.
Okay. Kate Bush it is. I mean, she's having a nice resurgence with Stranger Things. So, yeah, Kate Bush, Wildman. It is. All right, everyone. This is Richard Freeman. You just heard him, where you could find him and the organization. Check out his book. Buy it. Seems like it makes a great Christmas gift, or maybe all year round, depending on your inclinations. So I thank you for coming to us, especially since we sort of met and booked this thing within a week, which is sort of unheard of, at least in my experience, very rarely anyhow. And folks, if you're just stumbling upon this show by accident, or you're a fan of Richard's and you came here, this is Garden of the Doom. Just subscribe to it and you'll get 3 shows. Not every week, but some weeks. Get Garden of Doom, which is, well, stuff like we've talked about today. Garden Views, which same type of variety, but more law, business, science, geopolitics, a little bit of pop culture, a lot of entertainment law, which takes us into different entertainment areas as well. And then there's GOD Presents the Book of Black, which is where me and my co-host PJ Black, who's been a pro wrestler for 26 years. Some of you who only follow WWE will probably remember him from his Nexus days as Justin Gabriel. And we talk to people in and around wrestling about Garden of Doom type things. And I also have some special co-hosts also from the wrestling world who are lined up as well as alternatives. But yeah, and the most recent show is with EC3, former NWA and Impact heavyweight champions, separately, of course. So good stuff there. And Tyrus has, you know, if you don't know him from wrestling, you know him from Fox News. So he's been on the show. So yeah, check that stuff out. Like, subscribe, refer, you know, and all that other good stuff. Anyway, the next things you're gonna hear is Kate Bush's Wild Man. Thank you again, Richard Freeman. Pleasure. And if you ever want to come back, you're always welcome.
I'd love to, yeah. Maybe tell you about how the next expedition goes when I've done it.
I'd love to hear about it. All right, excellent. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.